Okay, we're here in the shop today, just unpacked our brand new Eastwood QST-30 quiet scroll air compressor. Figured we go over a little bit about why we're ditching our piston compressor for a scroll technology and kind of why we chose for this pretty expensive Eastwood model, but I think it's going to be worth it. So we've been for years and years using this kind of dirt cheap, it's like a $200 just department store 21-gallon air compressor. And this is a piston compressor, meaning in order to make air, it basically works like your car's engine. There's a piston that goes up and down, there are some valves, and the electric motor spins that piston, makes it move up and down, compresses air, puts it in the tank. This thing works fine. We've built quite a few project cars with it, but it's really, really loud, like standing next to an unmuffled V8 with open headers. And it's also pretty slow. It can just barely keep up with a DA sander and, or run an impact gun if we're doing a bunch of stuff in a row. And it also has a pretty short duty cycle. We have to stop and let it cool off fairly often. So we're hoping that by spending a little more, about $18.99 actually, when jumping to this Eastwood compressor, we're gonna really, really improve our experience in the garage. This thing, instead of using a piston and looking a little bit like an engine on the inside, looks a lot more like an airplane actually. It has what's called a scroll compressor, which is a little bit tough to mock up with my hands, but picture two snails making love, and that is what this looks like on the inside here. Spinning against each other, these two scrolls compress air in a much, much more efficient way than a piston compressor with fewer moving parts, and it also makes it much, much quieter too. So this thing is about 63 decibels, which is quieter than I'm talking right now, versus this, which is about 18 million. And it also means that this can run at 100% duty cycle and can compress air without introducing as much heat. It's much more efficient. So because of the scroll compressor technology Eastwood put in this, it's actually nowhere near a fair fight, even though it's about the same size as this old compressor we had. They say that this 30-gallon compressor can actually go head-to-head with a 60-gallon compressor and beat it. It makes 145 psi of air, and it can deliver it at 12.7 CFM at 90 psi, which is kind of where you'll be using the air for air tools. This thing, in comparison, is rated at something like 4 or 5 CFM, and we actually measured it at less than that. So how come the Eastwood quiet scroll compressor can actually be so quiet, make so much air, stay so compact, all that? Let's do a little bit of a tour of the guts of each compressor and how they work. So we'll start with the traditional style compressor. Here is, again, this is a tiny one. It was cheap, but you'll find the same basic components in pretty much any traditional piston compressor. You get an electric motor here that connects to a piston and a cylinder. You got a head with some valves in it, and basically electric motor spins, moves the piston up and down, pumps air from here out to here. These are little cooling fins to try and get the air cooled back down after it is compressed and then pumped into the tank there. So this works. A zillion compressors have been made with this exact technology and they work fine, but as I said, it's loud, it's fairly slow, there's a duty cycle, things have to cool off. So it's, it gets you by. Let's go over here to the scroll compressor. That's the heart of the Eastwood. I can already tell this thing is made out of way heavier metal. So first of all, I'll say that this looks a lot more like a piece of industrial equipment instead of a cheap consumer good. Part of that is price point. A nicer, bigger piston compressor would have heavier castings, maybe a divorce motor with a drive belt instead of a direct drive. But the Eastwood here, basically, you got your electric motor, just like the piston compressor. This one's bigger, it runs on a 220 volt connection. And then this is the actual scroll compressor here. This is where the snails live, they make air. And basically, instead of pumping up and down like a piston compressor, the electric motor turns the scroll, which they mesh with each other, and that pumps air from this air intake to the air outlet here. Oh, this compressor also has some other cool features. Big oil tank and an oil filter and a moisture separator built right in, which should make cleaner, drier air and make it last longer too. And then it also has this cool part here. Instead of just having some fins on the air outlet, instead of just having some fins on the air hose to the tank, the Eastwood compressor actually has a little intercooler here, just like a Subaru. So air goes through this radiator. It has a fan in here driven by the electric motor, and that cools the air back down to hopefully make a cooler, drier air in the tank. So, and then here we got a 30-gallon tank, and because it can make so much air so quickly, it doesn't need to have that giant storage tank that more traditional compressors have. It can just make the air on demand almost. So that's kind of the difference between a piston compressor and a scroll compressor, and we're pretty excited to fire this up. Okay, with any new thing we drag into the garage, the first step is obviously to race it, right? So we're gonna race our old compressor against our new compressor here, but we're not gonna figure out which one's faster or which one has better wheels or anything. We're gonna race on sound, because that is the main reason to buy one of these quiet scroll compressors from Eastwood. They claim that this one will be about 63 decibels, whereas this one is something like 90 or something crazy. I can't even be in the garage with this compressor running without wearing earplugs. So we've got our little handy dandy smartphone decibel meter set up there. It is equidistant from the two compressors, although to be fair, you know, without having both of them in a laboratory with a perfect background, without me here contaminating things, it's going to be pretty hard to get real scientific data. But I think it'll still be pretty obvious that this one's a lot quieter, and it's so quiet actually that I let it run all the time in the garage without earplugs. I can have a conversation, I can talk on the phone. It really doesn't matter if it's on or off, whereas this one I wanted to push it out in the yard half the time. So let's get them both fired up. Before we do this, we should probably say that this also isn't quite fair for a piston versus a scroll compressor, because this one runs on a 220 volt connection and this one is on a standard household outlet. A bigger, higher displacement, higher voltage, bigger motor piston compressor would probably be a little quieter and a little faster, but that's okay. The difference is still going to be pretty stark. Plug them both in here. Okay, and first I'm going to go ahead and turn on the Eastwood compressor here. So, as you can probably tell, I don't know if my mic's picking it up or not, but it sounds about like an air conditioner. I could totally work on a car, I could listen to the radio, it doesn't really matter. And the decibel meter says right about 67 decibels, which, a couple feet away from it in a garage without any, really anything to absorb the sound, machine right behind it reflecting things, that's pretty darn impressive. So that was the Eastwood compressor, barely louder than a conversation, totally no big deal. I'm pretty impressed. I'm pretty happy to have this thing here. Let's turn on the old school piston compressor, and I'm going to put my earplugs on for that one. Wow, I really love being in the same room as this. So the Eastwood compressor was right about 67, 68 decibels, something like that. And we are at 87 decibels a few feet away with this piston compressor running. So it's a pretty big difference, even without a laboratory or a better decibel meter or anything like that. So I don't even know if you can hear me talking right now. I certainly can't. So that's the difference, right about 20 decibel difference, which is huge in the world of sound. And this one also is over the line of causing permanent hearing damage if you spend too much time next to it. Whereas the Eastwood, you can work all day next to it without earplugs and be fine. So pretty darn impressed with the Eastwood Quiet Scroll 3060 compressor. And one other cool thing to talk about is this one would make that horrible racket for way, way longer than the Eastwood does in order to keep up with our average workload here. This one, it seemed like it would hit its duty cycle all the time and we'd constantly be dealing with, you could cook an egg on top of this thing, we would let it run so much. Whereas the Eastwood only has to run, it comes on every 10 minutes or so just to top off the tank when we're working. So let's talk downsides. There really aren't that many downsides except the price, and this thing's expensive. It's $1899.99 and then you got to pay to ship it and all that. So is that extra money worth it compared to a traditional 80-gallon 220-volt piston compressor that you can pick up at Lowe's or Home Depot or any of those stores for probably $900 or $1,000? I'll answer that this way. Those big piston compressors are probably the low end of the piston compressor market, and you can absolutely spend way more if you go to a more name brand or something designed for a bit more industrial use. Just like you can spend a lot more on a scroll compressor, because you go to any body shop or real auto repair facility and you'll find a $5,000 or $10,000 or $20,000 scroll compressor out behind the building supplying the whole shop with air. So this is a lot more expensive than other consumer compressors, but you can also look at it as a really, really affordable way to get into true professional level equipment. As far as quality, Eastwood offers a 3-year warranty, and they say that it can last for 100,000 hours of continuous use. Eastwood also offers replacement parts and filters and all that sort of thing for it if we ever have any issues. As you might have noticed in the background, we just finished plumbing our shop for air to take advantage of this big new compressor. So we're going to get back to working on project cars and making the kind of content you're used to. If you want to see more videos like this, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe, and follow Grassroots Motorsports to see more.
Support brands that support Grassroots Motorsports. Get your chemical solutions from CRC Industries. Visit crcindustries.com to learn more.